All right, so we're on chapter 12 of the book by Morgan Housel, The Psychology of Money. Chapter 12 is called Surprise. Surprise! And it really goes on about how you can't really predict the future, which everybody knows you can't predict the future, but for some reason in finance, so many people think, oh, a good person can predict what's going to happen. Well, this whole chapter argues against that, and it does it very, very well, very, very convincingly. It starts with the quote that historians are not prophets, which was by Carl Sagan. And Morgan Housel says, well, that should be stuck on every single investor's wall. I've found a bit of blue tack here, which I'm playing with, so I'll just put that out of the way. Very, very good case he makes for this is the fact that a famous physicist once said, imagine how much harder physics would be if atoms had feelings. They might have said electrons had feelings. It was one of those two. Well, the fact is that with finance, prices of things are driven by human behavior. You could have the best company in the world with all the best fundamentals in the world, but if everybody thinks it stinks, they're all going to sell it and the price will drop, or they're not going to buy it in the first place. So how does he go about this chapter? Well, he starts off by talking about the fact that finances over the last 100 years or so, as in the stock market and recessions and everything, nobody saw it coming because all the big events are things like recessions, big events are things like 9/11, the war in Ukraine now, or Ukraine, nobody saw them coming. Some people will say people did see them coming. Oh, it's all the Americans, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't matter because the people that this applies to are people who didn't see it coming. Normal people like me, like you, normal people who want to make the best of their money, investors, etc. All right. History is never a good guide to the future because the things which make history are generally big events that nobody predicted. And nobody can predict how one big event leads to another big event and leads to another big event. So the example that Morgan Housel uses in this chapter is 9/11 led to the Fed dropping interest rates, which led to trillions of dollars in student loans with a 10.6 default, which also led to the low interest rates, much easier lending, which led to an overinflated housing market, which then led to the 2007-2008 recession, some of the highest unemployment that the US has ever seen, and a massive crash in international stock markets. So that's the events you can't see coming. The other thing is, and here's a good example that Morgan Housel uses, ancient Egyptian scribes used to use daily, I don't know if it was daily, just regular measurements of the height of the Nile to predict worst case scenarios, which is a bad idea because a worst case scenario is generally something that you aren't prepared for. So, oh, look, the river's never been higher than, 100 meters, so it'll never go higher than 100 meters. Well, the last disaster was when it went higher than anybody expected it to go, so using the past as a guide for the future is ridiculous. This chapter also gets back to tail events. So there was a chapter previously called Tails You Win. The tail events are basically what matter. If you've got a standard distribution like this, most of this is irrelevant because what's going to affect your wealth, your returns, anything else is something over here, or something over here, or something over here. I need to wind the screen. The tail events, the ones that nobody expected, the big events. So think about the last 200 years, he says. Think about the 19th and the 20th centuries, during which there are 15 billion people born. And then he comes up with a list of 7. I can't remember all of them, but Mao Zedong was on there, Stalin was on there, Hitler was on there, Bill Gates was on there. 4 people. He comes up with 7. But anyway, it's 0.00000000004% of births have shaped most of the economy. Bill Gates, Microsoft, if it wasn't for that, how different would the world be? How different would stock markets be? How different would everything? Who would be the richest man in the world? Nobody knows. All right. Mao Zedong, China, obviously Hitler, shaped borders. So did the UK and their colonies and their general, well, we've been in, we've taken what we want, we've got all the money, now fuck you, we're going to draw a line here and you can fight over it forever. Small events. all right? Not small events, massive events, but events which were such a tiny, tiny decimal point of everything that happened. There were maybe trillions of projects in the last 100 years, but the projects that mattered, not projects, events, you know, the atom bomb, certain world wars, certain recessions, coronavirus. Unless you're going to be one of these Pollyanna idiots who reads the bloody Daily Mail and thinks everything's great. Brexit. Yeah, small events that nobody predicted, because to predict them is to take a leap above anything that's happened in the past. Another great line was, things that have never ever happened before happen all the time. That was actually the line from Carl Sagan, actually. The one about historians are not prophets came later on. So when he goes back to talking about, the 7 people who were born, if somebody had given up on finding, I can't remember the name now, the guy who found the cure for polio, if he'd got cranky one day and decided he wasn't coming with a cure for polio, then maybe Bill Gates would have died of polio, and everything that Bill Gates' actions have done to change the world would never have happened. So you couldn't predict any of that. Outlier events lead to other outlier events. We can't even see the first one coming. So the whole point of this is using history as a guide for the future is stupid with money. What you need to be is prepared for any kind of change. Maybe you could call that margin of error. Maybe you could call it flexibility, which was covered in the previous chapter. It says if you have money saved and you have wiggle room, then you've got flexibility. When something unexpected happens, expect the unexpected. When something unexpected happens, you might be able to take advantage of it if you've got money, if you've got wiggle room. That's not a very technical phrase, but I think it's a good one to use. Okay, we'll stick with that. And then, so talking about Bill Gates, Mao Zedong and everything, the fall of the Soviet Union, who saw that one coming? What's happening in Russia and Ukraine now is a leftover from the fall of the Soviet Union, and what nobody will ever say, but also NATO imperialism, them pushing and pushing and pushing, and maybe Putin is a war criminal, they say. I won't disagree with that, but then so is Israel, so is the UK, so is Saudi Arabia. Nobody says anything. So is America, goddamn. Nobody says anything. I remember Condoleezza Rice on TV once going about, absolutely invading a sovereign country is a war crime that must not be done. This was in the wake of the US invasion of Iraq. Sovereign country. Hello. Anyway, getting back to it. Further on in the chapter, he talks about possibly the greatest book ever written on investing, The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham, which Morgan Housel read as a teenager, and then figured out that none of the formulas in there, he got excited about the book because the formulas are basically a step-by-step guide of what to do to get rich. He says he's never met an investor who has made any money following any of those. The reason is because Benjamin Graham, who was in Morgan Housel's, was a wildly successful investor himself, said at the end of, in an interview at the end of his life that, look, what works doesn't always work. What works now doesn't work tomorrow. What worked yesterday won't necessarily work today. So he was always changing these formulas. So saying, oh, none of these formulas work. Well, of course they don't, because Benjamin Graham was a contrarian, and what everybody's doing, he'll do the opposite. You write a formula of stuff that works, everybody starts doing that. It doesn't work. Why did he keep coming up with new additions, with new formulas? Because the old formulas didn't work anymore. So if you find something, oh, look, historically, this worked really well, and some investors are really happy, because the techniques they're using are backed up by 10 or 100 years of data, it doesn't mean shit. Because things change. So that's why this chapter, I love this chapter, is called Surprise. It's about a 20, and I listen to it on audio, right? I listen to it, and it's 20 minutes. So this is meant to be summary. So I want to make sure this doesn't go beyond about 10 minutes. So there you go. That's the review. Chapter 12. You can't use the past to predict the future because unexpected events, things that have never happened before, happen all the time, and they're the ones that will shape everything. So how do you cope with that? Have flexibility, and don't think you can predict the future. Another point that he makes in this chapter is really good, which is people who have lived through a couple of unexpected events, they become overconfident in their ability to predict events, which they can't. So that might be their downfall. Very good chapter. All right, I hope that was helpful. Do another chapter soon.